All right. Good morning. Is the audio good for everyone? Yes. Cool. So let's get started. So we're here today to learn a bit about the Azure Cloud Automation suite. As we all know, there's a lot of products out there in Azure, and the idea of this session is we'll go into a number of products that can help us take advantage of the cloud and use our existing scripting skills to either help ourselves out or to help our colleagues or our managers out in order to automate things. So we have a couple of products we'll be talking about, but the whole idea is we have a lot of products out there, and there's a lot of technology out there, and we want to use the technology to be happy, because we all want to be happy, right? So a little bit about myself. I put my own picture up here, but yeah, I mean, I'm already standing here, so here's a picture of my dog. I call it my dog. It's actually not my dog, it's my parents' dog, so I steal it occasionally. So my name is Jaap. I've worked with PowerShell for quite some time. Used to be a sysadmin. Now it's a bit complicated what my role is exactly, but I still work a lot with PowerShell, run a couple of open source repositories, and I work for Rubrik. I brought a couple of t-shirts with me and some swag. So if anyone comes up with a cool question and you guys want a new t-shirt, just raise your hand and I'll do a completely random draw of whoever gets the shirt. Sound good? Cool. So let's start off. Does anyone know the name of my dog?
What's the breed?
What? It's a white shepherd, Swiss shepherd. Very good question. You're in the running for the t-shirt already. Yes. Cool. So what we're going to do, I have a very, very good agenda. So what are we going to use? Why are we going to use it? How are we using it? And of course, demos. If at any point you guys have questions, you girls have questions, raise your hand, shout at me. It can be interactive. It's not a very big room. And if I can't answer it at that time or it goes too deep, I'll catch you at the end of my session. I'll stick around for a while. So why are we actually automating things? So we want to automate things because we don't have 4 hands. So we can't be the people typing with 4 hands on the keyboard. This is from CSI, by the way. Probably seen it at some point. So what we want to do is we want to take the repeating tasks, we want to take them out of the running, and we want to make sure they're executed the same way every time we do it. And what the technology we'll be using for that at the core is, of course, always going to be PowerShell. But we'll go and take a look what other tools are out there. So aside from this cool graph, which shows us if a task happens X amount of times, costs so much time, at this point it will be worth it to invest some time. I don't fully agree with this one because there's another reason. We want to automate things because we're cool, right? Sometimes it's just a lot of fun to create something. Even though it's not extremely useful, it can be a good learning experience. And, well, it's fun to stay engaged. So we're going to automate all the things. This is the meme for now. I'll actually get to the session. So, about this Azure thing. I already mentioned it, that there's a lot of services out there. So I kind of cherry-picked a couple of the services I think are most applicable to you guys, just to get a feeling for the room. How many of you have worked with, no, any admins here? Sysadmins, mostly? Okay, well, that's my background as well, so that's good. So the thing with Azure is, there is a lot of it. So I actually went through this morning to check up if there were any new ones, and I had to re-record this video because a couple of new services had actually popped up since the last time I did this. I didn't count the exact number, but we can see there's a lot out there. So what we'll be focusing on today is a couple of things. We'll take a look at Azure Automation, so that's the one on the right. We'll start off with that one. Azure Automation is based on Windows PowerShell. It's good for configuration management. We'll take a look at Microsoft Flow. Not directly related to PowerShell, but we can do some PowerShell-y things with it. we'll take a look at Cloud Shell. Cloud Shell is awesome because everything is in the cloud, so why shouldn't a shell be? And then we'll jump into Azure Functions, which now also supports PowerShell, which is really cool. Thank you, Joey. So let's introduce the cast of people. So as I will be talking about the different ways of automating things, we have a couple of different people in the organization. We have the manager on the left, we have the end user in the middle, and we have the sysadmin on the right. And that is a precision tool he's holding. He knows exactly what he's doing to that printer. And that's kind of what we are. We have a different precision tool. Our tool is PowerShell. So for the bonus question, who knows which movie this is from? Well, not The Office, Office Space, but close. So let's get started with Azure Automation. Azure Automation is the scheduling engine, the configuration engine we can use to configure our devices, to run our PowerShell scripts, and we can both run these scripts and workflows in the cloud. Cool thing about Azure Automation is there's a lot of example scripts out there that you can directly start using. So if you want to get started with Azure Automation, all the examples are out there. I think it's mostly suited for configuration management, the slightly longer running tasks. And there's a couple of things we can do with this. So we can automate our processes. We can finalize the configuration of our Azure hosts. It integrates with everything else, so we can trigger it by webhooks, so we can trigger it from any other kind of automation. And if you want to get started with it, there's 500 free minutes available for it. Is anyone already using Azure Automation? A lot of people? Well, that's good, because I scrapped my demos of Azure Automation so we can move on to the cooler stuff, because this is still Windows PowerShell, not PowerShell. So we'll skip over this one. So Microsoft Flow. Anyone a Microsoft Flow user in there? Couple of Flow users. So from the cast of people I showed, what kind of users would be using Microsoft Flow? Would be the admin, the end user, managers? I'd say it's a bit of a combination. It can be for all of us, because there's actually some advanced functionality where you can work with regular expressions, and you can build quite complex flows. So that would be something an admin or a developer would be able to do. But because Flow is so easy to use, you can also share your flows with either the end users or even with your manager. Because, for example, a traditional way of doing things is the weekly reports. I think every one of us has run weekly reports for something at some point in their career, right? So this is something, the downside of a weekly report is it's generated at a certain point in the week. And maybe it would be useful to know what the current status is, or what is happening in the environment right now. And if your manager, for example, wants to have this information, he would have to send an email to you, or even worse, walk up to your desk, ask, can you do this one thing for me? And well, then you can't look at the cat pictures anymore. So this is something we want to prevent. So what we could do is we could create a flow that our manager is able to trigger either to the web interface, or depending on your manager, you can get an app on their phone. You just give them one button, generate report, and they can generate the report on the fly. You can either choose to send it by email or by OneDrive, and we can work like that. So a couple of things for the people that haven't worked with Microsoft Flow yet. So the base of Microsoft Flow, it's built on top of the Power Apps platform. So there's some similarities to both Power App and Logic Apps, if you're familiar with that. Flow is the slightly simplified, more user-friendly version of this. So it's easier to use for the end user. As an admin, you would more likely go for Logic Apps, or for Power Apps if you're more on the dev side. But these connectors, these are actually shared over Logic Apps and over Microsoft Flow. So the idea of these connectors are to provide a rich interface between different services. So there's a couple of examples here. We can see Outlook, we can see Twitter, we can see RSS. And what we can do, we can either extract information out of this, and the information that comes out of this, you can kind of see it like a PowerShell object. So we're getting structured data back. Then we can do if-else statements. We can create an approval flow, and we can tie this all together. Next up, we have the templates in Flow. So these templates, we can use them to. These are a couple of pre-set up connectors that are connected in a certain way. Nice example that I always like to point out is the Save Office 365 attachments. Because in the past, I've been in the unfortunate position where I had to write this in PowerShell. Has anyone ever did anyone ever do any Outlook automation with PowerShell? You don't look very happy. I wasn't very happy. So the nice thing about the fact that this is in Flow, the only thing you have to do is click the template, and you're able to, in this case, store your attachments on a OneDrive folder, or make a more complicated flow. This is something I also wrote in PowerShell, and it was significantly more complicated because you have to work with a COM object, which is only intended for interactive use. It's a bit of a mess. It will work eventually, but it's a very painful process. So I think that's a good example of how Flow makes things simpler for us. So embrace the new technology, makes you happy. So we have our connectors. These can either get the data out of other cloud services. Of course, the Office 365 suite, but there's a lot of third-party connectors as well. We have our templates there. And the good thing about Microsoft Flow is we can do approval workflows in here. And we can also have very long-running tasks here. And the way the payment model works, you pay per execution. So we do the opposite we would do in PowerShell. In PowerShell, we would write a lot of separate functions that call each other. In Flow, we would not do this because then we have to pay for multiple executions. Kind of depends on what kind of licensing you use, but if you use the free version, you get a set number of executions, well, the free version, the E free version, so you're still paying for it. And it can run for up to 30 days, so that's quite long. So let's go take a look at what we can do with Microsoft Flow. That's the Azure portal. So we'll start out with managing our flows. So this is what it looks like when we enter Microsoft Flow. If we want to create something, we can go into New here. We can either create from blank, then we use our own connectors to create a flow, or we can create from template. And I'll just click to the example I gave of saving your attachments to disk. I'm running this over the 4G connection on my phone, so it's, if it's slow, I blame that. So let's see. Let's use this one, save the email attachments. You can see this is what we're doing. We'll load. You can see I already have the connectors. I already entered the permissions because I'm already using Flow, so I don't have to enter any credentials. If you would be using this for the first time, you'll have to enter your Office 365 credentials. So,
They do expire after whether?
if you change your password.
Yeah.
Yep.
How does that interact with MFA?
I think there will just be a MFA pop-up. So
it stores the token, and when the token expires, then you go in and change it.
your MFA token?
Yeah.
No, you just authenticate against it, and then it stays authenticated. But if you have MFA enabled, then you probably have to use your MFA once. I have actually not tried it myself with MFA.
We have a set where it expires basically in 21 or 20 plus days, where it prompts you again. It says,
Oh, okay.
log back in.
So my assumption, the question is, what happens if you have MFA that expires after 20 days? Well, I would assume your connection also expires then, and you have to make the connection again. Re-enter your credentials.
I'm probably jumping ahead, but I'm assuming that there's somewhere that you can see whether your flow is actually working or not.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So we'll create, we will create this flow, create flow. We'll wait for a few seconds, and we can set up a number of options in here. So we'll click Edit, because obviously we haven't specified where we're actually saving the files and this sort of stuff. So if we go into On New Email, we can select which folder the email should come in. So this is useful when you have email rules set up. You can set up email rules for go to the flow folder, whatever ends up in the flow folder. This is what you would take action on. And for every attachment on the email, we'll create a file. And we have a condition in there. What's this condition? Oh yeah, that it's actually creating the file. And then if we want to, we can even put in additional workflows. But because this is just one to show how we set up these connectors, we'll exit out of this one. So if we want to take a look at what kind of connections we have set up, or which connections have expired, which was the question I just got, is we can go into connections. Give it a second, and what we'll see here is all the accounts I've authenticated, so all the different connectors. So this is going to be a lot of Office 365 stuff, but for example, I also have my Twitter account set up. I'm not actively using it to actually tweet something, but you could use Microsoft Flow as a tweet bot if you wanted to. So you can see there's a lot of stuff in here, and if one of the accounts would be expired, on the right side we would see a notification, credentials are incorrect or connection is not available. Second thing we have is gateways. And gateways are a way to connect Microsoft Flow to your on-premises environment. So by installing a data gateway connector, this is just a connector you can install on your server, or in this case, I installed it on my tablet. And you can have interactions with your actual operating system directly from Microsoft Flow. There's a couple of operations you can do there. You can write files, you can access your SQL, and a couple of other interactions. So if we go into my flows, and we want to see if anything is failing, you can just go to the overview if you want to see it from the GUI. And I'll go to one that I know has failed in the past, which is this one, display message. And we can see the run history, and we can see this one failed a couple of times because I entered the wrong credentials for this one. So how does this interact with PowerShell? Well, as you can see, there's obviously not a lot of PowerShell in Microsoft Flow. But we can do some interactions with the local operating system, for example, by creating files. And we can use this to trigger PowerShell scripts. So what that would look like, let's switch over to code. So what this would look like is if we go into this flow, we go into Edit. We have Create File here. So we create a file in, let me make this one bigger. Let's see, this is internals. There we go. And we can see we have the folder path flow, and the trigger is my trigger.txt. So what this will do is create a file on our C drive, and we're going to trigger on that with this bit of PowerShell code. So what we can do is we can set up a file system watcher. We set it to watch for a certain path and a certain file, and if this file is created, it will execute the script. And the script we want to execute is display message, and display message, all it does is displays a little pop-up box with the text we type in Microsoft Flow. So switching back to Flow, what this would look like if we actually want to execute this. So if you go into display message, I clicked one too far. If we go into here, we can click the run button to manually execute the flow. And we can see here that we can enter the message. Oh, let's make it something sensible. Hello, PowerShell plus DevOps Summit. And now if I would have the script running, I didn't turn on the watcher right now, this one will pick up, will set the message on the file system, and it will pick it up as soon as there's a file created. So, switching back to PowerPoint and hoping that we won't lose the screen. Shift F5. Sorry?
How does the polling frequency work? How often does it check to see if the file has been created?
Oh, so that's it's a file system watcher. So you can set up this whatever speed you want. If I go back to the code, give me a second. I can show you what it looks like. Where is it? So we have it here. So we register an object event, and then the moment a file gets created, it's practically instantly. I think it's a couple of milliseconds before it picks it up. But this watcher is only for the duration of the PowerShell session, so it's obviously not a very reliable way. It's just intended as a demo of how you can integrate it with PowerShell if you really wanted to. Other way you could integrate it is by writing something to a SQL database and going from there, or any kind of other interaction. So what we've shown that there's connectors out there. I already mentioned that there's a couple thousand free executions you get if you have an Enterprise E3 subscription, which I think is the most common one on Office 365. You can have approval workflows, and because you have all these connectors, it's very easy to integrate it with all the different services. Any questions so far? Oh, I had one in the back first. What's that?
There was a command like set sheet. What does that do?
The set sheep commandlet is a very important commandlet. I can show it at the end if I have some time left. Does something with sheep. Yes, in the front.
Do you know if the local gateway, is that included with E3? Do you know?
So the local gateway, you can just download it from Microsoft Flow. So there's a download button.
That's not an additional license?
It's not an additional license. So if I go here, click done, there's a download button here. Flow for mobile, if you want it on your mobile device, or the data gateway. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. So moving on, Azure Cloud Shell. How many of you have already worked with Cloud Shell? Joey. So Azure Cloud Shell is a cloud-based shell. I think a little bit less than a year ago, there was a big change in Cloud Shell for any of the early adopters that already worked with it back then. The big change back then was that they went from a separate Windows host and a Linux host to just Linux with PowerShell core on top of it. So why is this important? Well, obviously you have different commandlets available based on whether you're using Windows PowerShell or PowerShell core. So things you should think of, you can obviously not do anything with your register or with your event log if you're on a Linux host. So what kind of technology do we have, or what do we need if we want to get started with Cloud Shell? Well, obviously you need an Azure subscription. You need to be able to connect to Cloud Shell. So there's a couple of ways you can do this. You can just do it from the browser. If you want to do it from the browser, you can either use portal.azure or shell.azure.com. You need to be able to create a storage account. So If you have a non-administrative Azure account, the permissions you need is you need to be able to create a new storage account, or otherwise your admin should create it for you. And you need to use the shell skills. So we got a nice little turtle there. I didn't put a turtle in there. It's PowerPoint. It makes up whatever kind of icons it wants based on the context. So I like the little turtle. So the good thing about Cloud Shell is it's for free. So it doesn't matter if you use it for 1 minute or for 24 hours a day. And you only pay for what you need storage-wise. So that's the only cost you have if you're using Cloud Shell. So by default, it will create a storage account with 5 gigs of space, and this has your Linux image in there and whatever you store in there. Then you can also connect what's called a cloud drive. A cloud drive is another Azure storage account, and this is what you can use to put your own custom modules or your own custom scripts or your own tools as far as the tools are not available already. So already mentioned, you can also run it from VS Code, which I think is the nicest and most intuitive way of running Cloud Shell. And the one thing to keep in mind when you're working with Cloud Shell, it's completely free. And in order to keep it free, there is a timeout limit. So if you're not using it for about, they say 20 minutes, but I've seen it disconnect after 10 minutes already. If you're not using it, if you're not typing any commands, it will automatically disconnect. And the moment you disconnect from your Cloud Shell, your commands stop running. So it's really intended as an interactive shell. So let's go take a look at what we can do with Cloud Shell. So I'm currently in the Azure portal. So we can see here we have the Cloud Shell icon, and we can also open it up from here from shell.azure.com. Had some issues with it earlier where it got into a logon loop. So let's see if it's stuck in the loop again. Not sure what's happening there. So I'll open it up from the Azure portal instead, because it should be working here. Let's see what we get. So what it's doing right now, it's trying to find an available container host, and we're connecting to that using Cloud Shell. So it takes a little while. You can see at the top. Here we go. You can see here it's set to PowerShell. The only thing that this does is it makes the background blue, because it's kind of a shame they made it black in PowerShell 6. Hope they make it come back in PowerShell 7. And if we switch it over to Bash, it will turn the background black and will end up in Bash. But other than that, there's no real difference. For example, if I just want to use Bash, I can either enter Bash and run ls, for example, or ps. But even if I'm in PowerShell, obviously the bash commands are still available. So if you're familiar with using PowerShell core on Linux, then you probably already know that a number of the aliases are gone. So this is something that hits me personally. Whenever I'm using PowerShell, I always used ls to do dir. And if I do it on Cloud Shell, there's some unexpected results. I'll get into that right now. So if I use dir, before I get into that, I'll do get the PS drive. You can see we have a number of drives available here. And the one that we are most interested in is the Azure drive, because the Azure drive actually allows us to navigate Azure as if it's a file system. And this is made possible by ships. And we can already see we have a double prompt here. here is where we are in Azure, and this is just to indicate that we are in the Azure drive. So if I do a dir, you can see I have two subscriptions in here. I'll go into my Visual Studio one. And if I do a dir now, you can see that we can actually browse through my Azure. So if I go into resource groups, for example, you can see we have tab completion as well. And if I would do get AZ VM, so get my Azure VMs, there's two VMs available here. And if I would go into which resource group do I want? So test DL, and I do a get AZ VM in here. You can see that now we only get one VM back. So it's actually aware of where you are in Azure. So this makes it easier to work with Azure directly from PowerShell because it's context aware, and it also makes it easier if I want to create a resource in this resource group. If I would do new AZ VM or new AZ web app or whatever kind of Azure resource I want to create in here, it will automatically fill out the resource name. So it's very nice to work with Azure this way, and also you don't have to authenticate because we authenticate the moment we connect to Cloud Shell. Because we're in the Azure portal, we are already authenticated. Last week, they also released the Connect. Let's see. Get autocompletes. There we go. We have the Connect XOPS session. And this allows us to connect directly to Exchange Online as well. So if we want to start managing our Exchange Online, we can do it directly from Cloud Shell, and we don't have to do anything with authentication or connecting to a session. So it makes it a bit easier. I'm going to do it, but I actually don't have Exchange Online on this account, so it will fail. There we go. The other thing, if you want to get your scripts or your modules in here, that's actually quite simple as well. So what we can do, let's see. Let's go into the demo folder. So I had my Microsoft Flow module. It's not particularly useful for Azure Functions, but we can just drag and drop, and it will just upload it, and it's already on there. And this is over a 3G connection, so it's quite snappy. It's quite intuitive to get your scripts, your modules in here. You can of course also use the install module and the find module. Question in the back.
Did that go to your 5 gig storage account you mentioned before, or to your cloud drive?
Sorry, what's the question?
Did that file you drag and drop go to your 5 gig Linux image thing that it creates for you, or your dedicated cloud drive?
So this one, by default, goes into your Linux image. It doesn't go to your cloud drive. So now there is still a custom action you'll need to take to get it to your cloud drive.
It just goes in the folder you're in, right?
No, it goes to your home folder. So if I do, so I am now in Azure, but if I do, no, that's not the right one. If I do ls, so now I use the bash command, I can actually see that I'm still in the file structure there. But it always goes into your home folder. So in my case, this is /home /Jaap. Any other questions? So Cloud Shell, this one is obviously, I showed the image, the manager, the user, and us. This is obviously for us. The one thing I still wanted to show. So my favorite use of Cloud Shell is actually, it's really good at displaying Unicode. So let's see, cd home. Here we go. You can. This is actually my favorite application. This one's not on GitHub, but I will upload my slides and all the code I'm using here up to GitHub. Cool. So, I showed how we can log into Cloud Shell. One thing to note is I'd already set it up. So the first time you connect to Cloud Shell, you try to use it, you actually have to create a storage account. You can either do that to the GUI, or you can create it using PowerShell commands or CLI commands. You have PowerShell and Bash available, and it doesn't really matter which one you select. Drag and drop is cool. It's also available from VS Code. And the nice thing is, if you go to docs.microsoft.com, try it in Azure Cloud Shell, and it will actually connect to your cloud environment. And you can go to the tutorials, just copy pasting stuff to get the hang of whatever technology you're trying to learn. So, wait a minute. Azure Functions. So, yesterday there was a very nice blog post written by a very smart guy. And Azure Functions is now V2. It was already V2 for quite some time, but it's now V2 for PowerShell is now also supported as a language. So what does this mean? Well, our good friend Joey wrote a blog post about this, and in this blog post there's a lot of examples available and links to the documentation of how you can set this up. What I'll do here is, I have 7 minutes left, is I'll jump into VS Code and I'll show how we can actually create our first Azure function directly from VS Code. Cool thing about Azure Functions is if you put your code in Azure Functions, it runs directly on the Azure hardware, so you don't have to think about the operating system. It's completely serverless, and you pay for the number of milliseconds or seconds your code takes to execute. So this one, unlike Azure Automation, is really for the short-running tasks, anything shorter than a couple of minutes. The default limit is 5 minutes. You can up it to 10 minutes. If you want to execute something that runs for a longer period of time, you'll either have to split it up, or Azure Functions is probably not the tool you want to be using for it. So, the differences between Azure Functions V1 and V2, and we'll skip over that one, so we actually have some demo time left. So, let's go into here. So what we can do, if we have the Azure Functions extension installed, we can click on Azure here, the little Azure icon. I'll open up my Visual Studio account. I have 2 subscriptions. I'm already logged into this. The first time you want to start using this, it will prompt you to log on. It will open a browser for you, and in the browser you can authenticate your VS Code. So if we want to actually create our first Azure function, we can click the Create Functions button. Go here. Oh, actually, let's go into PowerShell Summit. And let's click Create. Yes, create a project. So we can see we have a number of languages available, and obviously C# is in there. And we have 2 preview languages, Python and PowerShell, and we're obviously going to go for the PowerShell one. So let's click that one. We can choose what kind of trigger we want, so we can have different triggers, so that is what is going to trigger your Azure function. So we're going for a webhook because it's the easiest one to demo, and we can give it a name. We'll call it Demo PS 8 Summit, and we'll do function. We'll open it in here. So it will now create the project. Because we only have a couple of minutes left, I'm going to switch back to the GUI interface so I can show you what it looks like. Make this normal size again. There we go. Move Cloud Shell out of the way. You can get into function apps. We'll switch over to the PowerShell and DevOps function app that I've created, if my 3G is participating as well. And what we'll be able to see there is we just have a number of files in there, JSON files and a PowerShell script. And the moment either the timer triggers or you hit the webhook, the code will execute. If you hit the webhook, you can either choose to do a get or a post. If you do a post, you're going to shoot a JSON object at it, and you can trigger based on the JSON object. And then you can work with whatever output your Azure function gives you. It doesn't have to give output, because it can also just execute a task if that's what you want to do. So if I go into functions, the example I put in here, that one's not that interesting. We're going to HTTP trigger, open up the code in here. And if we give it a second, we'll be able to see how the PowerShell code for a default function looks like and how it works with the JSON it puts in there. So what we have here, it says the namespace. We can see here it's going to set the variable name, and the output of this function would be hello $name. So we can do this with either a get or a post. If we do it with a post request, it will look like this. We can click run, it opens it up on the side. You can do hello name Azure, and the moment we change it to Summit, click run, we'll be able to get our output out of our Azure function. The cool thing about using Azure Functions for this purpose is because it has webhooks, you can also integrate it into Microsoft Flow, because Microsoft Flow completely supports webhooks, and it can call a webhook, and it can then work with whatever output comes out of your Azure Functions. And this is another way you can expose your PowerShell code to your end users or to your manager. So if, for example, you wanted to generate a report about your Azure infrastructure and which VMs are up or anything like that, you can put that in an Azure function and trigger that based on your Microsoft Flow. So with that, we have 2 minutes left for questions. And in the back, if you still want to see the sheep, I can show it after that. Does anyone have any questions?
Is that your dog?
That's not my dog, unfortunately. So the question is, what do I find Flow useful for? I mainly use it to distribute and to give other people the ability to use my PowerShell code. So I use it to just trigger something I've written in Azure Automation or something I've written in Azure Functions, and I trigger it from Flow. So my flows are usually really simple. So the question is, did I use Microsoft Flow to get logs from multiple mailboxes and then upload it? I haven't personally. You could do it. I would probably set up a forwarding rule on those mailboxes and forward it to a SharePoint list so it all ends up in a document library, and then work with it. Would probably be an easier way.
Okay.
Any other questions? Otherwise, I would like to recommend that you come up to the front, then everyone can have lunch, because I don't want to be the guy that stands in between 50 people and lunch. Okay. Thank you.